Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our Strata Committee training this evening. Um, I'd like to, I guess, firstly, thank you for your support and supporting this initiative for our quarterly Strata Committee training webinars. I hope you're finding them useful. If this is your first webinar, you will have access to the recordings of any prior webinar, and we'll email those out with the recording of this webinar to anybody who's registered. So again, thank you so much for supporting this initiative. This session is being recorded, obviously, for those who could not attend, and the link will be made available, as I said, to all of you who have registered, whether you've attended or not. Firstly, who are we? So my name's Andrew Tunks. I'm the Learning and Development Director here at netstrata. I'm joined this evening by Melissa Elliott, a Senior Strata Manager who's been with us a very long time, Mel. Thank you so much for jumping on.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Not a problem at all. Just a quick disclaimer before we get too deep into the exciting world of bylaws this evening. Firstly, this webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice. There's lots of little legal references we'll refer to as we go, but the information provided in this webinar is not a substitute for professional legal advice. So there you go. I got that out of the way. Now, before we get stuck into bylaws, just a couple of things that I want to explain to all of the owners. Firstly is we have a learning culture here, I guess is the term or term to use. We've always been learning. So our business was established in 1996. We've had a training division since 2004. We've actually been conducting our own CPD, continuing professional development, since 2020. So we have around about 12 of our strata management staff who have a qualification in training and assessment. So effectively, we have a whole bunch of strata managers who can go out and teach strata. So we like to think that we know what we're talking about, which is great. That's what you want when you've got a strata management firm managing your largest asset. And the sorts of things we train our strata managers on, we do certificate 4 in strata community management. So that's external training that we obviously fund and pay for. Obviously a prerequisite to agents getting their license. We also have fortnightly strata management meetings where we update our team on all things strata. We do some strata basics and explain courses, which are material that we've actually drafted in-house, explaining strata. I guess go figure, of course, we're going to be training on strata. Also, we talk about building defects, strata law training, and various other industry things and CPD, continuing professional development. I like to just start off with that, just to sort of explain that we do have a learning culture. This year, we're really sort of focusing on our strata committee training and obviously trying to help all our strata committees obviously gain more knowledge about what they own in. So a new initiative in 2023, and obviously we'll be continuing next year and the year after, etc. It seems to be quite a popular initiative. Lots of people signing up for strata committee training. Whether they're able to attend tonight or whether they watch the recording seems to be quite popular. And on the screen there's the sort of topics that we'll aim to attack if we haven't already. All right, so tonight's topic, what we're going to do is we're basically going to take a deep dive into bylaws. It sounds riveting, I know, but we'll try and make it give you a little giggle along the way. And any questions that you do have, feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A, whichever you wish. And either Melissa or I will try and get to your question. If we can't answer it live, we'll endeavour to get back to you following the session. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is the purpose of bylaws. So we've been pulling apart a section of the legislation around the purpose of the bylaws. We're also looking at media releases, which there's some interesting things that have hit the press over the last year or so. So we'll walk you through that. Also explaining the processes for owners corporations when they decide to follow up a breach, a bylaw breach. Also some case studies. We'll also get into two sort of topical bylaws, being pet bylaws and short-term letting, which has, again, hit the media of late. And we'll also be demonstrating how bylaws can be changed or updated. So I guess first and foremost, before I get into it, we'll have a little warm-up on the chat and the Q&A. If you just want to jump on the chat, have you had residents in your building breach the bylaws? I know that's probably do you have, eyes ahead and some arms? Yes. So in pretty much every strata scheme, generally pet breaches, noise breaches, someone parking in my spot breaches, all those sorts of things in strata land. So we've got Albert said yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Albert. What do you think, Mel?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be really surprised if somebody said no in this
Yep.
day and age. But yeah,
Yep.
yep. Mark said yes, hourly.
Hourly, yes, yes, yes. We sympathise with you because generally we've got to try and navigate our way through sorting those out. So, no, very good. And it might be like on the screen there that somebody having a party. So, very good. All right. So, let's start off with the purpose of bylaws. And Melissa is going to walk us through the purpose of bylaws and explain all
Yeah,
things Strata Act Section 136. So, go for it, Mel. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, so I was just about to say, so I'm going to talk to everybody tonight about what does the legislation say. So the Strata Schemes Management Act 2015, Section 136(1) states a bylaw may be made in relation to the management, administration, control, use, or enjoyment of the lots or the common property or the lots of a strata scheme. Yeah. Okay. So first one being management. So how will the scheme use its bylaws to manage its residents and their invitees? And we've got a couple of examples up on the screen there. So the first one being around behaviour. So things like noise. So the bylaws may outline noise disturbance in your lot. So potentially, parties, loud music. Around parking. So they may outline how to use your visitors' parking and or your individual lot residential parking. They may also talk about smoke drift. So whether that can be how you deal with smoke drifting from another lot into your lot or potentially from common property into your lot. Item number 2 there we've got is use of common property. So your bylaws may outline what you can and cannot do on common property. So for example, a quick one there might be around, children riding bikes. So your bylaws might state, children can't ride bikes on the driveways. And the last one there we've got is around animals. So your bylaws may also outline how many animals you can keep in your property and may also outline a process in which to make strata aware of any animals you do have in your property. So the second one that we've got up on the screen there is around administration. So the bylaws may outline an administration process that can be followed. So again, we've got some examples up on the screen there. So first one being around recovery of expenses. So things like fire apparatus inside your unit. So it could be your individual smoke alarm. Any administrative charges. So things around postage or stationery charges. How the owner's corporation will deal with their levies, whether it be a debt recovery process or a payment plan process, and how your owner's corporation may deal with maintenance that's solely exclusive to your individual lot. So it could be an absolution of maintenance bylaw that says, any fixture or fitting that's benefiting your lot only will be your lot's responsibility to repair and maintain it. All right, the third one that we've got up on our screen there now is around control. So how will the scheme use its bylaws to control internal lot activities and potentially common property activities? So again, some examples that we've got up on the screen there are around minor changes. So things like change of flooring. So a simple application form, with the relevant supporting documents can be submitted to the strata manager and the strata committee for approval at a meeting. Or things like your major renovation. So you might be wanting to do a bathroom renovation where you're going to be ripping up tiles, waterproofing, fixtures, fittings. Those sorts of applications have got to go to a general meeting of all owners corporations. Your bylaws may also talk around the control of services for your scheme. So maybe things like NBN installation or any embedded networks for electricity, hot water, aircon. And finally there we've got architectural code. So your bylaws may also go into some detail about changes to the appearance of a building. So from time to time you may get your manager reaching out to you to say, look, you can't do a certain aspect, or you can't, put something on your balcony, or, we can't change the colour of the building because it does actually go against the architectural code for the building.
Yeah, and I
And
guess just to jump in there, that
yes,
very
yep,
well
sorry.
be. You can only have white, Holland blinds, for example. And someone goes and installs, purple drapes, and therefore the bylaws can be used to obviously, pursue that individual.
And the lucky last one we've got up on the screen there is around the use or enjoyment. So again, how will the scheme use its bylaws to implement rules or processes? So we've got common EV charging. So your scheme might have EV charging capabilities in their visitors' car parking spaces. And so, your scheme might come up with a bit of a booking system in order for those with an EV charging or car to charge through that booking system. Right to the peaceful enjoyment. So again, your bylaws may talk about, you cannot create any noise inside your lot that disturbs any other lot. And our final one there around common property facilities. So you may have, a pool, barbecue area, play equipment. So your bylaws may implement rules around times in which you can use those facilities, things that you can take and not take to those facilities. So essentially, overall, summing all of that up, the bylaws are essentially the rules for the site, and they're the obligations of owners, tenants, and visitors, and the way in which the property is to be maintained. So I'm now just going to go over and talk about some different types of bylaws. So up on the screen there, you'll see model bylaws. So these bylaws are essentially a template that are set by the New South Wales government. I'm sure most of you have probably seen these ones. It's very common for a regional developer to pick from a set of model bylaws. From time to time, they may implement additional bylaws that may be relevant or unique to your individual schemes, but this is just a bit of a guide that the New South Wales government puts out. Next one, Andrew. So up on the screen now, we've got some special bylaws. So these bylaws are ones that you would usually introduce later on for the scheme, and they're usually introduced to improve any administrations or processes for your actual building. So a couple of high ones that we've got there. So parking bollards, storage cages, appliance of maintenance, EV charging, your payment plans, enforcements of bylaws. If you've got any community rooms on site, lot owners charges, payment of insurance excesses, and anything around minor renovations. Now, up on the screen, we've got common property rights bylaws. So these are some examples of a bylaw that is conferring a special privilege, allowing the use of common property. So this could be the owners corporation as a whole, or even an individual use that's given a privilege to some common property. So we've got visitors' car spaces, any lock-up cages or storage areas, terraces, balconies, planter boxes. You may be on the ground floor and there's a little planter box in front of you that's only benefiting your lot. So the owners corporation might grant you privilege to use that. Utility infrastructure, so maybe things like air conditioning equipment, rooftop spaces to put solar panels, access pathways. And then now we've got some empowering bylaws. So these bylaws are essentially an addition or a change to our common property and also outline the ongoing maintenance. So these might be the installation of CCTV cameras around the common areas of your buildings, installation of some speed humps, convex mirrors, installation of boom gates, and some some garage doors, whether it be for your individual residents or for the owners corporation as a whole.
Thank you, Mel. I'm just going to walk you all through some media releases concerning bylaw breaches. So there's been a couple of interesting ones of late, and I just sort of want to highlight them, obviously. So, yeah, any of you attending this evening can obviously understand perhaps sometimes when bylaws get escalated, obviously they're generally about people's behaviours, and sometimes those people run off to the media, and I can sort of just run you through a couple that have landed there of late. So the first one on the top left there, this particular one was on a current affair in October. I think it was, say, the first week in October. Now, basically what this particular article was about, it was a strata scheme, I believe, in the northern suburbs, where basically there was a child crying sort of at all hours, and you could hear the parents sort of try and get the child to sleep and those sorts of things. I'm sure if there's any parents logged on tonight, you know how difficult that can be at times. This particular noise dispute then got pushed to the strata managing agent, and according to the news article, the strata managing agent then issued a letter basically saying that they would be fined unless they would, be able to reduce the noise, etc. So I'm not going to sort of talk around the it wasn't netstrata, just so that you know, but nonetheless, it was a strata managing agent who obviously issued a letter, and there's not too much on that particular article. If you Google a current affair and complaints over noise of child, you'll see this particular article. So I guess the reason why I highlight this is obviously bylaws are there to be, the rules and obligations that those residents need to adhere to. Obviously, though, on the side of that is life happens. And often, as a parent, when there's, your child's noisy, I mean, I have 3 kids, I know what it's like. When you're trying to keep a child, quiet or put them to sleep and you're in a shared environment. I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes a bylaw breach, occurs. And obviously, as I'm sure you're all neighbourly. Sometimes it's easy enough to knock on your neighbour's door and say, "Hey, your party was a bit loud last night," or you've parked in the visitor spot. Would you mind moving? And I guess in some cases, owners or occupants don't feel that they can do that. They then obviously pass that to the strata managing agent. Strata managing agent then either writes a letter to them or phones them and talks about the dispute. And often there's 2 sides to every story, and you might get quite an opposing version when you contact the individual. The next one down the bottom there is this one's actually back from 2020. So I'll have a little bit more to say on this one when we talk about pets in strata. But the keeping of animal, the Cooper case. So this is a famous case from a building called the Horizon in Darlinghurst. And basically, this individual moved into an apartment building, and basically she had a pet schnauzer. You can see it on the screen there. Lovely dog, used to have one. And basically, what had happened is she had applied to have the pet. The owners corporation said no. They had a no pets bylaw, and this particular one is actually a landmark case that forced the New South Wales government to change the legislation. And a Section 137 in the strata legislation was then born. And basically, it was seen that having a no pets bylaw is harsh, seen as being harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive, and effectively you can't really have a blanket ban on pets in strata. But basically there's some parameters in the regulations that we'll talk you through further on. But the reason why I highlight this, obviously, the 2 that are on the screen there, noise with young children, or noise just in general, and obviously the keeping of animals are obviously quite topical when you talk about bylaw disputes. There's another 2 here. Now the top one, out of control party in Airbnb in Sydney apartment building. We're going to again we're going to address Airbnb and what the law says around Airbnb. And I guess obviously short-term letting, etc. But this particular one was basically a party that had happened in an Airbnb, and it ended up so large that it spilt out onto the street, and the police were called, and there was rioting and all that sort of stuff. But it basically stemmed from a party within an Airbnb, within a strata scheme. The one down the bottom actually is a scheme that we do manage. It's a scheme in the city where basically there was late parties, and I hate to say the word, a bit of vomit. So somebody had had a little bit too many drinkies, and then basically there was vomit off the balcony on multiple occasions, obviously landing on the units below that have terraces, etc. So you've got a slightly different dispute there, where obviously it's largely affecting residents in the units below. All right, so moving on to the next point, the processes owners corporations may take should a breach occur. Now, I'm going to sort of walk you through the bylaw breach process. So first and foremost is evidence and notification. So we have a couple of slides coming up just with just some suggestions around how one would, pass on evidence of a bylaw breach. But effectively, if the matter is to be escalated in the future, we really rely on solid evidence. So they are things like, noise recordings of noise, or photos of the vehicle parked in the wrong spot, or potentially written information about the particular bylaw breach and the offender. Now, basically, what is sort of standard out there in strata land is around about sort of 1, 2, 3 general warnings that go to an individual. And then the strata committee can actually meet, and it's got on the screen there, notice to comply S146. Now, basically what that means is there is a section of the strata legislation, section 146, which basically says that if an individual is breaching the bylaws, the strata committee or owners corporation can choose to serve a notice to comply with that bylaw. Generally, that follows a couple of written and verbal warnings to the individual who's breached the bylaws. Now, let's consider for a moment that the Section 46 didn't wake up the individual and they just continued to breach the bylaws. Let's say it's a parking dispute, for example, or a pet dispute, whatever the case may be. The owner's corporation can then choose one of two avenues to then go down. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got an avenue that says mediation, then apply for an order, then a monetary penalty. So basically what mediation is, so the Strata Committee could say, look, let's go ahead and we'll mediate with the individual. Let's say it's about an animal dispute. Mediation applications are through the Office of Fair Trading. Your strata manager can submit that on behalf of the strata committee. Now, at mediation, generally, as the word implies, it's sitting around a mediation table trying to remediate or mediate the dispute. So trying to come to some sort of conclusion that works with, obviously complies with the bylaw, but obviously works with the owner's corporation and the individual breaching the bylaw. So in those cases, generally, if you take a bylaw dispute, like a pet dispute to mediation, you're sitting around the table, you're basically explaining to the individual what the bylaws say, and then obviously asking for their feedback, etc. Now, let's say you walked out of the mediation and the owner's corporation held firm that the bylaws should stand, and then you have another offence by the individual. The owner's corporation or its strata committee can then make a decision to apply for an order. So an order is quite specific. Now, generally in the legislation, you can seek an order for a multitude of different items, but obviously tonight we're specifically talking around bylaw disputes. Now, an order for a bylaw dispute, and we'll use a parking dispute, for example, the order would most probably be that the offending unit owner or occupant remove their vehicle from the visitor parking and not park there again, for example. Now, if they continued to park in that spot, you could then go for a monetary penalty for a breach to an order. And a monetary penalty can be up to $5,500 for the breach of an order. So again, that's route number one. On the other hand, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a different avenue. So basically, once the owner's corporation or its strata committee have served a notice to comply with the bylaw to an individual, if it's basically quite a simple bylaw breach, for example, like parking, you could say, well, look, don't park any longer in the visitor parking or on the common property. And if the offender continued to park, you could go for a breach to a notice to comply. Now, what that is saying you breach the notice to comply. We don't want to mediate with you. Your car's there. It's an open and shut case. You apply to MCAT for a penalty notice of up to $1,100. That's pursuant to Section 147 of the Act. So again, just repeating that, if they breach the Section 146 or the notice to comply, the Strata Committee can then go down that avenue and seek that a monetary penalty be issued. Now, again, if they continue to offend, cars still parked in the common property or in the visitor parking space, you can then go for a repeat breach or a further penalty up to $2,200 within a 12-month period of the initial breach. Now, we'll talk about a case study in a moment, but you can't do both avenues at once, and there's case law on this. So basically, you either go to mediation, talk about it, get an order, get a penalty, or go for a breach of a notice to comply. Now, I'll just stress that generally, if you want to go to mediation, it's generally for the more complex sort of bylaw breach issues. If it's sort of a really open and shut sort of a case, like I said, like someone parked on common property, most probably you would go a breach to a notice to comply and obviously seek a monetary penalty. But just bearing in mind, that avenue only issues the owner's corporation a penalty. It does not give them an order to remove the vehicle. So they could still just continue to park there, but obviously they would be incurring penalties as you go through that regime. Now, a really good change that happened in the 2015 legislation, which is our most current legislation that we work by here in Strataland, the monetary penalties come back to the owner's corporation. So they used to, under the 96 Act, they'd go to the government, and there's been a little bit of a change to that, and they're a bit nicer to us. We actually get the monetary penalties back to the owner's corporation. However, running a matter like this through NCAT obviously does cost money. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides' time.
Sorry, Andrew, just one quick one. We've just had a Q&A come through that says, who decides if a bylaw breach needs to be pursued or just a warning? Is it the Strata Committee? Yeah, so that I thought that was a really, really good one to comment on. So I know me as a Strata manager, certainly when, a complaint comes through, whether it's, from the Strata Committee or whether it's from an individual lot owner, if it is a clear breach, and I know you're about to go on and start talking about this, key evidence. But if it is a clear breach, certainly, I can go ahead and issue that breach right away. Some owners corporations may like to run it through their owners corporations, but it doesn't definitely need to be the strata committee that sign off on every breach notice that is issued. But yeah, Andrew, anything else to add to that one?
Yeah, I'll just say that the legislation says that the owners corporation may, reprimand an owner or occupier for the breach of a bylaw, and the key word is may. So it's a decision that they make. Sometimes we get, somebody living in a strata scheme, and they, just complain over and over and over again against a particular resident, and the strata committee might say, well, look, in our opinion, we actually think that what they're doing isn't that bad. It's just human behaviour, etc. And in those instances, sometimes the strata committee or the owners corporation might say, well, look, no, we're not going to pursue it. However, the individual lot owner could then take it to mediation or NCAT themselves as a neighbourly dispute. So sometimes it falls under that particular avenue. But good question, Mel. Thanks for that.
No worries.
Okay, Doug. So just moving on to evidence. So evidence of a bylaw breach can vary. So photos are obviously helpful. So for things like visitor parking disputes, they're obviously quite helpful. For items like washing on the balcony, or let's say somebody's installed pink blinds and the bylaws say you can only have white blinds. Those visuals are very helpful, and as the old saying goes, a picture tells 1,000 words. You can also have written statements. So you might have a declaration or an email from an individual saying, hey, on Saturday night at 10:30 at night, unit number 123 had a raging party and trashed the common areas. Here's photos, etc. So they might issue a written statement to that effect. And sound recording. So things like parties are often hard to get photos of, right? Because they're generally in a unit unless they're on the balcony and doing those sorts of things. So sound recordings of noises when you're on common property in your apartment can obviously be helpful. And sometimes the individual occupants don't know that their noise is that loud. Sometimes they just might be watching a movie or something quite loud. And often just a phone call from our manager to the offender might be enough for them to realise, to turn it down, etc. Just sort of walking through how to report a bylaw. So you can obviously email your strata manager, contact your strata manager via phone, but we do have a netstrata app. Now, if you don't already know, if you have a look on the screen there's a little tab on the bottom which says issues. And if you go to add, in the middle of the screen there, you can see two items pop up, one being maintenance issue, so a repair and maintenance item around the common property, and another one being a bylaw complaint. So you can lodge a bylaw complaint, and on the right-hand side, you can see that it allows you to detail the bylaw, the time and date of the offence and the offending unit or townhouse, and add any photos, videos, sound recordings, those sorts of things. So this is a handy way of us capturing the data for an initial dispute. Now, what we do on our end, we try and be very obviously detail oriented. We like to dot our I's, cross our T's, obviously phone or contact the offender, and obviously if need be issue warning notices, etc. for the breach of a bylaw following obviously the submission of a complaint. So at the top of the screen there are the QR codes to download the app. If you did miss it right now and potentially pouring yourself another wine or whatever it may be, eating your dinner, I will have the QR code up a little later on in the presentation that you can scan that and download our app. I do also want to highlight some important notes on the reporting of bylaw breaches. So evidence of breaches are generally not passed on to complainants. Like we don't go out there and say, hey, dear unit number 3, unit number 4, your neighbour has called us 15 times over the last week and sent us a ton of emails. Like we won't disclose where we got the the evidence from. I will say that most of the time, complainants will know particularly if it's a noise dispute or a pet dispute. They generally know, generally who may have, triggered a warning or informed their strata manager. However, we treat the matter with confidentiality, and obviously we, don't pass on your email or those sorts of things. However, it is usually forms evidence with applications to NCAT, to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, for hearings, mediation, and where penalties are being sought. So that initial evidence, if we get to the stage like I showed you, the one or two options, either going to mediation or seeking a monetary penalty, Obviously, NCAT or the Office of Fair Trading want to see sufficient evidence that the individual has breached the bylaw in order to fine them or give them an order. So that evidence that we get, so those photos or emails or things you report via the app, by law, the evidence of a breach will be recorded within the records of the owners corporation and may be used at NCAT, to obviously form the evidence of a dispute if it's not solved just by a phone call or a letter, etc., i.e. if the breach continues. So on the one hand, yes, we are as confidential as we can be. On the other hand, we have legal obligations to obviously record any dispute, etc., or any written or verbal communication on the records of the owners corporation. And that can obviously be viewed if someone does a strata search. It can also be viewed or used as evidence for NCAT submissions, etc. So hopefully you understand, both points there. The next one here is the preparation required for mediation or NCAT or seeking penalties. So if you're ever wondering what the next steps are, so often we have a bylaw breach that continues, like someone who's noisier than the average neighbour, or someone who loves to park their 48 cars all over the place. Certainly, I've lived in strata schemes that were like that. It's like they're almost car dealers in the basement. So what needs to happen in order for the matter to be taken to mediation, NCAT, or to seek a penalty? Generally, what we have to do as strata managing agent is compile the evidence. So obviously we have to put together the photos, the images, those written or verbal statements, obviously include any sound recordings if we have them, referencing items in the submission. So NCAT and the Office of Fair Trading are very particular in how evidence needs to be submitted. There is actually a guide on their website of basically how they like evidence to be submitted. So basically, you have to have an index and reference all the images and the bylaws that they've breached, etc. Have copies of the notices, the minutes, and obviously specific notations of what the applicant is seeking. So, are you seeking mediation? Are you seeking monetary penalty, etc.? We also have to include a copy of the bylaws referencing the specific bylaw which has been breached. So we need to say, okay, unit number 123 has, parked their vehicle on common property, which is a breach to bylaw 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever the case may be. Obviously, it helps NCAT to understand the timeline of the bylaw breaches. So specifically when it's, somebody has breached the bylaw multiple occasions, obviously a bit of a timeline to obviously set the scene of the reasons why you're making an application. And obviously we or the Strata Committee can attend the hearing. So it's quite detailed. And I put this on the screen just really for us to all to understand that it's not an easy open and shut case where if someone breaches the bylaws, we just, contact NCAT and then, a fine is issued. There is an onus of proof on an applicant to obviously be able to detail a proper case. So it's basically a consumer court. So it's very low cost to go to NCAT. However, and when I say that, it's generally about a $90 or $100 fee or something with NCAT. But obviously, the time the Strata Committee put into it, or if they delegate that obviously to us, the Strata Managing Agent, obviously our time is generally chargeable for these sorts of things. So often it's weighing up, whether to pursue a dispute or if it's a neighbourly dispute, like we were talking about before. If it's a neighbourly dispute, then perhaps sometimes, might be able to be sorted out between the neighbours who are having a dispute. Now, the common breaches that we see are probably not a surprise to those logged on this evening. So things like the appearance of the lot. So that particular one there is a scheme I used to manage where somebody basically put foil up on the balcony window. So didn't want to go to, a blind factory and get a nice Holland blind. Instead, they covered the window with aluminium foil. And we were left with quite a unsightly looking window on about a $300 million development. So it stood out like you know what. The next one, dumped items. So we get that often where items are just dumped on common property. So I think that image there is one of our schemes with a piano that's just stored on the side of some parking spaces. Smoke drift, so obviously, cigarette smoke or other sort of smoke that drifts from one apartment to another, obviously causing potential health concerns, to those around them. Obviously, as Mel said before, we often have smoke drift bylaws and those sorts of things that are in the initial bylaws, or sometimes owners corporations add them as they become a problem. Parking disputes, so you can see there the vehicles parked on common property. In the middle there, loud noises, so things like parties or, loud talking, loud music. We get lots of that. And washing on balconies, so we get a fair amount of those sorts of disputes. So they're just 6, but basically they're pretty common in strata land, as you can imagine. All right, moving on to some case studies. So there's 3 case studies I want to walk you through, and then I'll sort of summarize the key learnings that I think we can take out of these cases. So the first one is Brown versus the Owners Corporation Strata Plan 82527. And this particular one was heard in 2022. So this individual, Tanya, she lived in a strata building. She kept 4 dogs without any sort of written approval. So the Owners Corporation issued 2 notices to comply, alleging noise and bylaw breaches relating to those 4 animals. Legal action obviously then ensued, and Miss Brown allegedly failed to comply with a settlement agreement to remove the dogs. So she initially did agree, and then obviously the dogs remained within the lot. So in July 2022, NCAT ordered Ms. Brown to pay an $1,100 penalty and remove most of her dogs by a specific date. Now, Ms. Brown appealed the decision, and despite initially agreeing to the orders, her appeal was successful. So the appeal highlighted issues with seeking both compliance penalties in the same proceedings due to different procedural rules and appeal rights. So basically, what the Owners Corporation tried to do here is going back a few slides where I had the 2 avenues, you either go to mediation or you seek a monetary penalty for a breach of a notice to comply. This particular Owners Corporation did both at the same time. Now, I haven't seen a case prior to that, published that showed an Owners Corporation to have a crack at both avenues. Now, as a result, the appeal panel, so this went all the way to the appeal panel, and they ordered that the Owners Corporation need to start afresh and start again. Basically, they said that procedurally they did it wrong, start again, and focus only on going one avenue or the other. So in this case, they focused on seeking a general order for Ms. Brown to remove the costs, remove most of her dogs, and not a penalty. So again, you've got to be clear as to what outcome you're looking for. If you just want somebody to receive a penalty for breaching a bylaw, fair enough. You can obviously, go down that avenue. However, if you do want the animals removed, it is an order that you need to seek to remove the animals. The next case study that I've got here, this is an interesting one. This is a short-term letting or Airbnb dispute. So in this particular example, this is the owners of 2 particular strata plans versus Loop. So basically in this case, there was a short-term letting bylaw, and it was an interesting one, allowing the deactivation of devices, so the access swipes that I've got, swiping on the screen there, should the owner or their occupants breach the bylaws. Now, this was found to be invalid. So NCAT ruled this one out of order. They said, pursuant to Section 150 of the legislation, you can't basically turn off someone's access to the building. So the deactivation removed fundamental property rights without specified conditions or duration. So it was quite a flawed bylaw in NCAT's opinion there. So the lack of preconditions and unclear circumstances for denying access contributed obviously to the invalidity. Now, the second part of the bylaw requiring indemnification of expenses, there you go, got it, was found to be valid. However, the provision allowing the recovery of money as a debt deemed beyond power under Section 150s, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of time. So in that particular case, basically, the key takeouts are you can't have a bylaw that restricts someone from their unit, and obviously, dealing with the recovery of costs via a debt on the lot is actually a little bit tricky now. There's some wording that has to change in the bylaw, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. You got a question there, Mel?
Oh, no, sorry, I was just going through answering some. No, you're right.
That's all right. All right, so the third case study that we've got there, Folletti versus Eagles, Eagles versus Folletti. So this was an interesting one. So this particular one, and I've got a little video that's probably them having a party. So the case involved a noise dispute between Miss Folletti, who owned and lived in an apartment in Sydney, and Mr. Eagles, so the owner of the apartment above her. So Miss Folletti claimed that Mr. Eagles' tenants were creating excessive noise, obviously leading to her to seek orders from NCAT. And then basically NCAT dismissed Miss Folletti's claim, stating that she failed to prove that Mr. Eagles' tenants were responsible for the alleged excessive noise. So while NCAT acknowledged its power to order a lot owner to comply with the bylaws, it deemed itself unable to compel an owner to ensure their tenants comply with these bylaws. So this is sort of 2 things in the one case. So they didn't really prove that the individuals were the ones causing the noise. So again, it came back to the evidence that was served. So was it sufficient? In this case, no. So were there voice recordings? Were there photos? Were there written statements or affidavits? Perhaps not. Now, the second thing is basically the pursuit of the landlord over the control of their tenant. Now, this is an interesting one. Now, in Strataland, we've always believed, or most of us have believed, that, hey, if the tenant doesn't toe the line, there's potential to pursue the lot owner to then push the tenant to basically toe the line because of one fundamental thing, which is the leases with the owner, not with the owner's corporation. So that was always the avenue that you went. This case back in 2018 blurs the line on that particular one. So yeah, so obviously those three cases are very interesting and sort of some key takeouts, well, certainly in my view. The first one is not every bylaw is enforceable. And now I've got a picture of a wheel clamp on the screen there. Now, we had a number of owners corporations a few years ago that thought, wouldn't it be good to wheel clamp cars? You actually can't in New South Wales wheel clamp a car unless you have their permission. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't give somebody permission to put a wheel clamp on my car. So it's basically saying you can't wheel clamp people's cars. In other states, I believe it could be permissible. Here in New South Wales, yes, you can have a bylaw that says, well, wheel clamp your car, but when you actually go to wheel clamp it, potentially it's unenforceable and you might land yourself in trouble. Next one there, bylaws can be challenged. So any bylaw can be challenged. You could have the most, expensive lawyer in the universe draft a bylaw, and it might look really cool and wordsmithy and all the rest of it. And there could be particular elements that are challenged. I touched on the Cooper case, so the Horizon building in Darlinghurst, where a no pets bylaw was found to be harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive. That particular bylaw, we've had no pets bylaw since Strata began in the 60s. So that really overturned a view that we had that a building could be a no pets zone. Preparation is key. So obviously, serving evidence that's not so great can lead to a failure in pursuing the actual defect. Carefully sought evidence is important, and obviously detailing that. Proof that a bylaw has been breached must be obviously demonstrated, and also choosing an enforcement path is imperative. So as I said before, you can't actually go both dispute mechanisms at the same time, i.e. mediation, and on the other hand, be seeking a monetary penalty for a breach to a notice to comply. Pick an avenue, and then basically bylaw enforcement may be expensive. So if you can imagine, like the Cooper case, for example, that one would have cost an absolute fortune. So it started with the owners corporation basically, saying to an individual, hey, you can't have an animal. We said no, and then they won. Cooper then basically went to the appeal panel, I believe. That got overturned, and basically it went to the Court of Appeal. So it's quite an expensive process. So bylaws obviously must not be harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive. So there are a couple of key takeouts from those particular case studies. All right, talking around pets and short-term letting. So we're just going to sort of explore some topical bylaws, such as pet bylaws and short-term letting. So again, the Cooper case. So this, as I said, was quite some time ago. So on the 12th of October 2020, the New South Wales Court of Appeal unanimously decided that an owners corporation could not enforce a bylaw which imposed a blanket ban on pets. As I said probably half an hour ago now, basically the law was changed. So Section 137B came into place. So and this was sort of slipped in through a sustainability infrastructure bill that came in 2021. Now, this particular section was inserted into the Strata Act, and it said that basically you cannot have a bylaw which passes a blanket ban on the keeping of an animal. However, with that, so the Act says, okay, you've got to basically, in essence, be pet friendly with your bylaws. However, if a pet owner obviously doesn't comply, obviously with, keeping their pet under control. And I guess I've got a nice puppy dog on the screen there. You could never imagine a moment where that dog would be a nut, but you never know, do you? So there was also a set of regulations that got slipped in with the Strata Act amendment. So this regulation, it basically says that an animal will cause unreasonable interference with an owner or occupant's use and enjoyment of their lot if they do any of these items. So basically what they're saying is, on one hand, you can have a pet-friendly building, no problem. But on the other hand, if your animal causes a disturbance then there's potential to obviously seek that animal is removed on the basis that it's causing an unreasonable interference. Examples in the regulations are: the animal makes a noise which interferes with the peace, comfort, and convenience of another occupant. Secondly, the animal repeatedly runs or chases another occupant, visitor, or another animal. Or the animal repeatedly causes damage to the common property or another lot. The animal might endanger the health of another occupant. Or the animal causes a persistent offensive odour, so a stinky dog or cat or whatnot, that penetrates another lot or the common property. Or for dogs and cats, the owner of the animal fails to comply with orders under the Companion Animals Act. Now, moving on to short-term letting. So Section 137A was slipped in the same time Section 137B was. So there was two topical items at that particular point in time. So this section of the Act was introduced, which notes that owners corporation can adopt bylaws that limit short-term rental accommodation in their strata scheme by banning it in lots that are not the host's principal place of residence. However, if someone lives in a strata property as their principal place of residence, they will still be able to rent out their home or rooms while they live there, or while they are temporarily away. So let me sort of unpack this. So basically, the law allows you to have a short-term letting ban bylaw. However, it cannot apply to those who have their apartment or lot as their principal place of residence. So I'll give you a scenario. Let's say I own in a strata scheme and I go to Paris for 2 months and I rent my principal place of residence out on Airbnb for 2 months. That's not a problem. You can't stop that. However, if I'm an investor and I've got my unit and it's getting rented out full time as an Airbnb, yes, you can restrict that. Now, if you don't have any bylaws in place, there are still other short-term renting considerations. So, for example, owners who live on the property can rent out their homes throughout the year, including second homes like granny flats on the same site. For owners who live elsewhere, so those investor type owners that are using the property as basically short-term rental accommodation, STRA, as it's listed on the screen there. Non-hosted STRA is capped at a maximum of 180 days per year. What does non-hosted mean? If I'm not living in the unit at the same time that my Airbnb guest is there, it's non-hosted. So if I'm living in the main bedroom and I'm renting out the second, I believe you can do that all through the year, not a problem at all. So again, go back to the basics. You can have a bylaw that restricts Airbnb or stays or whatever platform they're using, but short-term rentals, if it's not their primary residence. If it is their primary residence, I believe there's not a whole lot that you can do. Now, some other things to consider are if the unit, apartment, lot, whatever, is being used as short-term rental. Basically, there's additional fire safety requirements. So if you've got a multi-room apartment, the smoke alarms need to be interlinked. And there needs to be things like fire signage and fire blankets and those sorts of things in the unit. So just think when you walk into a Hilton hotel, what are it's got a "you are here," how to get out of the unit, etc. All those sorts of things would apply. So think of it going into a hotel room. What sort of fire things are there? And generally that's required for a short-term rental apartment. Code of conduct. So they've got to adhere with the code of conduct for, obviously STRA or short-term rental accommodation in New South Wales. And they need to be on the STRA register. So if you want an Airbnb or stays out your property, you have to be on the register. And the booking platform requirements, basically the booking platforms then need to speak to the register and basically say throughout the year, how was the property rented in terms of number of days. As I said before, there's a cap on non-hosted at 180 days a year, so they obviously monitor that through the registration process with the booking platforms. All right, so demonstrating how bylaws can be updated or changed. Now, you've probably heard enough of my voice for a couple of moments. I'm going to hand it over to Mel, who's going to walk us through how bylaws can be changed. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, so up on the screen there, we've got a couple of really quick and easy, simple steps. So the first one there around the bylaw changes is it has to be done at a general meeting. So typically speaking, you might see additional bylaws or even amendments to bylaws on your annual general meeting, but there is nothing stopping an owners corporation calling a general meeting throughout the year if they do need to approve any bylaws. Now, second point there is that it must be a motion on the agenda. So whether it's your annual general meeting or a subsequent meeting throughout the year, we do need to have a specific motion along with that supporting bylaw and potentially any other supporting documents with that put on the actual agenda. Now, we do require a special resolution. So what does that mean for your owners corporation? Essentially, what that means is at your general meeting, so AGM or special general meeting, those owners who are present, and whether they are physically present, in person in the Zoom room, or they're represented by a proxy or a pre-meeting vote, they must be in favour of that motion for the motion to be resolved. So we do need 75% in favour of that motion. If the motion is resolved at the completion of that, obviously all the relevant paperwork, the sets of minutes would be drafted. And also there is prescribed documentation that we need to fill out for LRS or Land Registry Services. So that documentation would be completed and then it gets registered with the LRS. And once that is done, we can then go on to enforcing the bylaw. So look, obviously some considerations. So bylaws may need to be updated over time. Andrew's just spent the better part of half an hour talking about industry changes. Over time, rules and regulations change. So you may have bylaws that do need to be updated. The legislation does state that owners corporations may enforce the bylaws. So there's no mandate that they must, but they are there obviously to guide the owners corporation, so they may be enforced. And look, communication is key to dispute resolution. So again, Andrew touched on a little bit earlier tonight. You may have simple neighbourly disputes that could be resolved with just a simple phone call. Potentially, maybe you do need to go down to mediation, but certainly, yeah, the communication between strata managing agent, committees, owners corporations, individual lots, whether they're an owner occupier, a tenant, even a managing agent. That is the key to successfully administering bylaw breaches. So some bylaws that we've got up on the screen that you may not currently have in your owners corporation, very topical at the moment, EV charging. New South Wales government's currently released some grants around EV charging, and we will probably start to see a big take up of that over the next couple of years. Recovery of insurance excesses, pet updates. Again, you might be a scheme that has a building that's not pet friendly, so you might want to be looking to upgrade that to a pet friendly building. Recovery of lot expenses and absolution of maintenance. So again, any fixtures, fittings that are inside your unit, passing them back onto the individual lot. Obviously, benefit of that is hopefully you can take some of your general maintenance out of your levies. To try and bring that down a little bit and put that onto the individual lot owners.
Very good. Thank you, Mel. Just on the absolution of maintenance bylaws. So over the years at netstrata, we've had various types of these bylaws that we've suggested at annual general meetings. And I guess, as Mel alluded to, the idea behind them is basically to pass costs that are for items that only give an individual lot a benefit back to that lot owner. So examples would be things like your front door lock. So we often get requests, hey, I broke my key in the front door lock. Now, the front door of an apartment is common property. And if you don't have a bylaw passing on the absolution of maintenance costs back to the individual lot owner or occupant, then the owners corporation have to pay for that expense because basically it's a common property door. So often that we basically put bylaws for owners corporations to consider is to pass back costs, as I said, for items that are just for the exclusive use and enjoyment of a particular lot owner. So other examples are things like the exhaust fans in the laundries or bathrooms. Obviously, that could be a $300, $400, $500 expense. If you get to say year 8, 9, 10, when all these things, naturally come to the end of their life, you could have a very expensive bill as an owners corporation. However, if you pass an absolution of maintenance bylaw, it then becomes the individual unit who obviously pays for theirs. So the idea behind it is obviously to have less expenses for the owners corporation, and obviously pass those maintenance duties back to the individual lot owners. So there's certain things that you can't pass back. So things like, building structure, waterproofing, those sorts of things. The law says that you can't pass those things. However, in Section 106 of the legislation, it does say there are some items, obviously, you can decide by special resolution not to maintain. Hopefully that's clear. All right, we have quite a few questions in here, and we'll give it a crack of trying to get through as many as we can. Obviously, please feel free to fire them in there. There is one that I'll tackle first, and Mel, I might get to sort of read a couple and obviously answer them live.
Yeah, I've been trying to go through. Yep.
Yep, I see you've answered 20. Good on you, Mel. Good stuff. All right, there is one there. Can you block thanks, Alan. Can you block EV charging stations due to possible explosion, fire, as regularly seen in media? Who pays for the damages caused by exploding batteries, charging points, etc.? That is a really interesting one. I have actually been reading some of the proposed changes coming in the next segment of strata legislation updates. And basically, EV, obviously the government's sort of pushing EV charging. As Mel said a little earlier, there are some government grants where buildings can get up to $80,000, etc., to pay for their EV infrastructure. Now, with that, can you have a bylaw to block it? I believe there would be nothing stopping you doing that as an owners corporation, but I go back to that point I made earlier around, is that enforceable? So the state government are talking about at some point they would be considering passing laws that give individuals the right to charge. What does that mean? Right to charge their cars. So let's fast forward to say 2030. Let's say that 50% of the vehicle manufacturers are bringing in electric vehicles. There might be legislation passed to say that owners corporations have to allow individuals to charge. So therefore, at that point, the bylaw could potentially be unenforceable. So you can go down the avenue of drafting a bylaw for just about anything. That point around, is it enforceable? Depending on the individual situation, I generally suggest you get legal advice around it. And generally, if you're asking for something like an example I said before about wheel clamping, I've had strata schemes that got solicitors to draft wheel clamping bylaws, and then the actual solicitor said, well, hey, this is a great bylaw. I've tried my best, but is it enforceable? Question mark. Probably not. So I guess, yeah, that one, err on the side of caution with that. Mel, is there anything there that you thought you wanted to answer?
Yeah. So Albert sent one through just when we were talking around your evidence, and one of them there was around recording. So Alan has just sent through and said, so is it not a violation of privacy when you record for evidence? So I guess, from my perspective, I would always be encouraging, if we are sending video recordings, particularly around noise, that it's not of obviously people having conversations, that obviously we're taking recordings of maybe loud music or loud noise. Andrew, I'm not sure whether you agree with that. Obviously, potential violations on privacy of conversations. Potentially, there may be. Again, probably best to get some additional legal advice on that. But definitely, the recordings around noise disturbance that we're kind of looking for is loud partying noises and footsteps and those sorts of things. If
No, very good. All right. There was another one came through from an anonymous attendee. Just to clarify, this gets added to the outstanding strata fees account for a specific lot. I believe that was circling back to the point we said around it. It's obviously costly to run NCAT cases, etc. And the answer is yes. If you've got we've actually in 2023 proposed a bylaw for the recovery of costs around the enforcement of bylaws. So you can draft a bylaw to basically enforce bylaws, as I say, and generally you can recover the reasonable costs associated with doing that. Obviously, you've got to prove to NCAT that you've taken due course, so you've written to them, you've phoned them, etc., and we document all that. And then obviously, if they don't toe the line, and the owners corporation decide to pursue the bylaw breach and impose, a administrative charge. then yeah, as I said, there are bylaws that could deal with the passing back of that. Any others there, Mel?
Sorry, I'm just flicking through
Oh, there's
now.
another one while
Yep.
you're flicking through the. Can we have a bylaw that requires residents with pets to pay additional levy to cover building maintenance costs due to a mess caused by the pets? Little bit of yes, little bit of no. I'll answer it by saying that the state government have just released their next phase of strata legislation updates. We're actually going to have a webinar in December about that, about the changes to the legislation. One of them is that you can't charge an application fee bond to individuals who are seeking to have a pet. However, recovery of costs associated with damages that they do, I believe that is most probably a yes. But again, it comes back to the evidence. So do you have CCTV recordings? Are there written statements of people witnessing, that animal, doing what on common property or eating the skirting boards or whatever the case may be? And then obviously in those cases, you could potentially recover the cost. But again, you'd have to have a bylaw that outlines that and obviously gives you that power.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so
Okay,
there is another one from an owner that's come through that says, can I install an extra fan in the bathroom as the original fan is not strong enough to extract the moisture after a shower? I've been complaining since I've moved in, but there's no change. So look, obviously, first of all, I'd reach out and find out what are the bylaws around your owner's corporation? Is there actually an absolution of appliance maintenance? If there is, and you as the individual lot owner are now responsible for that, then certainly by all means reach out and replace the one that's there. If you do need to install any additional ones, depending on where it's going to be ducting to, definitely reach out to your strata manager to seek clarification whether the current bylaws do allow for that. If the current bylaws have not been placed, an absolution has not been placed back onto the individual lot owner, and it is still the owner's corporation's responsibility to manage that. Again, certainly reach out to the strata manager and raise that with them.
No, very good. Thank you, Mel. Another one there from Edward Hanna says, "Hi guys. Recently, a lot owner believed her car was being damaged by neighbours whilst in her parking spot. CCTV cameras did not cover her space, so she installed a wireless camera over her parking spot. Neighbour complained regarding privacy, and the strata manager asked her to remove. If her vehicle had a dash cam or inbuilt CCTV system such as Tesla, how could the SM stop her from recording? I tend to agree with you. If you've got a dash cam or CCTV on common property recording the movements, there's probably no difference to someone putting a camera within their lot property, surveilling the common areas. Although with that particular instance, if there's people saying a privacy issue, etc., generally speaking, I would suggest that they get legal advice as to whether they can record. But again, if you've got a vehicle with a dash cam and it's flashing away, I don't see any reasons that you could actually say, please turn off your dash cam when entering common property. So potentially an interesting case that you've got there. There is another one, Albert. So, can we have a bylaw to hold the release of rental bonds for rented units due to outstanding costs, so repair of common property caused by the tenants? Really interesting question. And I would love us to be able to do this. The issue is that the bond is held by the owner of the lot or the property manager, not the owner's corporation. The issue is that the owner's corporation don't have power to hold that rental bond. However, generally speaking, the best way of tackling this one is communicating with the owner of the lot, expressing the damages to common property. Obviously, that owner contributes levies and financially obviously contributes to the owner's corporation. It's in their best interest as well to obviously recoup the costs from the tenant. So I've had situations where the landlord has worked with me as I, resolved disputes of damage on common property and withheld a bond and obviously claimed amounts on behalf of the owner's corp. And then obviously we charged the owner. The owner then paid it back using the bond money. So it is possible, but it's tricky. Again, it involves a cooperative landlord to obviously be able to help you recover those costs.
Have we got time for one more, Andrew?
Yeah, go for it, Mel. Yep.
Yeah, so we've had another one come through from Anonymous here, just in regards to visitors parking breaches. So they've said that they've collected their evidence, but there's no way to actually trace back which unit this resident currently lives in. And look, that's certainly something that I get quite often. I don't know about you, Andrew, but I know from my perspective, I do have to heavily rely on, other owner occupiers, other committee members, to keep an eye out if that offending car, you ever see it parked in another lot space. Legislation currently doesn't mandate any resident, owner, occupier, or investor or invitees to provide their registration details to the strata managing agent. So we have no way to actually enforce receiving those. Certainly we can ask, but the owner isn't obligated to provide it. So usually, again, this is where the communication key comes in. I work with my strata committees and those on-site owners just to keep an eye out. If we see an offending car parked in a lot spot, we can create a little register, and then once we have been able to identify it, certainly we can issue a breach notice or what have you. Sometimes, if your owners corporations has CCTV footage overlooking the visitors parking, you may be able to track which level they live on, but it can be a bit of an onerous task. And certainly, we ask for all the help that we can get trying to identify, the offending vehicle.
Yeah. Very good, Mel. There is one I do want to answer. I know we're getting a couple of minutes past 7, but there's one here actually addressed to you, Mel. So why are the empowering bylaws required? So from Andrew, why are the empowering bylaws required or a good idea for things like install of CCTV, speed cameras, etc.? Can't these kind of things be agreed by the owners corporation at AGM and implemented without needing a bylaw? Basically, the answer to this one lies in section 108 of the Act, which says if you're adding to common property, you have to pass a special resolution. So you need a special resolution, meaning 75% or more of the owners present at a meeting, and the votes calculated on the unit of entitlement, voting in favour of the motion to be passed. So that is the same requirement for a bylaw as it is a motion. The reason why we normally suggest an empowering bylaw is it is an easier record in the future. To basically be able to look up when a certain decision was made. So, for example, if you're installing CCTV, it's, as I said, it's the same bar. For the sake of registering a bylaw, what it helps you for, generally the empowering bylaw says, at this point in time, the owners corporation decide to, add cameras to common areas and maintain the cameras, ongoing. And often what happens in the future is people say, oh, when did we ever decide to do that? Now, if it was 15 years ago, you sort of traipsing through the minutes or the records trying to find where that decision was made by special resolution, particularly the items we're talking about, CCTV, privacy. Why did you have the right to record me, etc. You can then look up the registered set of bylaws and say, well, on this particular date, a bylaw was passed and it's since been registered. So I guess the answer would be it's probably better housekeeping, to tidy up and record a decision that is being made. But technically, you could resolve it by just a special resolution motion. But again, when you're adding or changing common property, sometimes it does become topical, and we generally advise pass a bylaw of an empowering nature to be able to record that. All right, so we'll have to draw the webinar to a close, and thank you so much for all of your questions. We got through as many as we could. 31, Mel. How's that? That's pretty good. Thank you so much for attending tonight. We do have a netstrata mobile app. No such thing as a free lunch, so we like to just promote the app. So feel free to scan on the QR code there on the screen. Download the app if you haven't already. Obviously, you've found out that you can now lodge bylaw disputes as well as maintenance disputes or concerns or questions. Also, stay connected. So we're on Facebook, Insta, the usual socials. Feel free to follow us. We will be having another quarterly Strata Committee training session in early 2024. So feel free to reach out, to myself or to Mel. Our emails are on the registration link. Suggest something you'd like to hear about in the future. And there's a whole bunch of suggestions on the screen. And we're generally guided by the feedback that we get from owners. I'm more than happy to talk. I'm a Strata nerd. I can talk on any sort of Strata as are most of our staff. But again, thank you, Mel. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Andrew, and thank you for everyone's questions that came through.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we'll leave you to it. Thank you so much.